Welcome to Whisper, the Contingent Workforce podcast that will feature client-side leaders who may not always have the loudest voices in the industry, but whose perspectives are sharp, grounded in real-world experience, and committed to humanizing the industry. I'm your host, Mickey Pelletier, and to hear a little bit more about the show, I'm going to go over to Manish Senta to share a little bit more. Manish?
I want to start off by acknowledging the audience who gave us immense love on the very first episode. So we are back. We are back with the second episode of Whisperer. The intention of starting Whisperer was very clear when we partnered with Mickey and TechWisen is to really bring the voice of people who are elevating our industry. Talent acquisition business is an integral business function, and we want to elevate the brand and raise awareness how leaders on our second episode who are really contributing to the business function. So we would like to welcome Nick DeZaglio, who is a leader at Biogen, but also a well-respected leader in the contingent labor space, to be our guest on the second episode. We are really hoping that we will continue to share insight into the business, continue to raise awareness how a strategic leader like Nick is really driving business function, business growth, and business success by creating a more strategic plan for Biogen. And last but not least, really give a platform to people to empower the audience by sharing their point of views, sharing their knowledge, and sharing their experience. So again, we welcome your feedback, but we are excited about the episode too.
And joining me in hosting this show is Matt Fringley. Matt, why don't you say hello to everyone and give a brief introduction?
Hey, Mickey. Great to be here. I'm Matt Fringley, Senior Vice President here with TechWisen. Been with the business for just about 5 years and very much looking forward to being involved in the podcast with you.
I'm glad to have you here co-hosting. Always good to have a good friend along the way. But let's meet our guest today. We have Nick DeZoglio from Biogen. Nick, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, your role, your background in the contingent workforce industry?
Well, first off, thanks, Mickey and Matt, for having me here today. Pleasure. Nick DeZoglio, been in the industry about 15, 16 years now. Started off in actually college recruiting. Realized there was no money in college recruiting. Went over to the staffing side of the business, was there for about 4 to 5 years. Got recruited out of there, went to Cengage Learning, was an internal MSP there for about a year, and then transitioned over to MSP organization, Unlimited at the time. And at that point, I was there for another 4 years, and I realized, it'd be really nice to sit on the other side of the fence. And so I transitioned over to the client side, joined Staples in 2019. A pandemic happened in 2020, which was a blessing in my life right now. I look at it as a blessing. Lost my job. And I got to spend time with my wife, childless pretty much for 4 or 5 months. We were able to travel a little bit to the Caribbean and just be a couple. I got an opportunity at PerkinElmer, and I was at PerkinElmer for about 4 years. I ran the COVID labs out in California, managed all of our contingent workforce in the United States, and then global towards the end there, managing divestiture of the 2 companies. That was PerkinElmer and its new parent company. Sometimes things on its course, and I was able to find a great opportunity with a great organization, Biogen. Biogen is a local brand name here in Massachusetts and in your homes. It's a pharmaceutical organization known for its MS drugs and other great accomplishments over its history. Current role is managing all of our global external workers from a contingent standpoint and compliance. So new policies, new trainings, new dialogues, scenario guides for managers, and then of course day-to-day operations for its contingent labor program.
It's always interesting to hear people's journeys, how they got to this space. None of us went to school for recruiting, contingent workforce management, program side, provider side. So appreciate you sharing.
Science degree with a minor in sociology.
Speaking of politics here, that's always a topic you want to get into in a podcast, right? Let's hit you with a fun little icebreaker here. Nick, would you ever want to run for presidential office one day? Why or why not?
Well, fun fact, I'm actually a city councilor in Methuen, Massachusetts. I've been a city councilor for 6 years. Being a part of a community is a great joy. Prior to that, I was on the school committee. I think actually I've spoken to a few politicians that have gone on to Congress and governors that were school committee members, and they say to this day that the worst thing about politics or the worst job that they ever had politics was actually being on a school committee. But no, I don't think I ever want the big guy job in the White House there. No, never. I think the number two role might be fun. Being the P or lieutenant governor, that would be kind of cool. You don't get blamed for anything. It's always the guy in front of you or gal in front of you that's getting blamed. And you just kind of sit there with the Secret Service and state police saying hi to people and doing all the fun things, I think.
Shaking hands and kissing babies.
I love it, man. I don't have to do the bad policies. I don't have to be the bad guy. I'm just the number two. God forbid anything happens to the number one. Sure, slot me in. But
Then you have to step up then, yeah.
I'm not I'm the guy behind the curtain, I guess, the wizard.
All right. Well, it sounds like you were already going down the path. You're already in a office right now, but maybe that's it. But you're not going to go all the way. You'll eventually
I
stop.
think this is the
President's a
furthest I'll
step too
go.
far.
Yeah, I think this is the furthest I'll go. I enjoy the industry too much.
I don't blame you on that in terms of not taking that office. It's a big job. It's a lot of responsibility, and no matter which side you fall on, at least half the country is gonna not like you. So it is what it
True,
is, right?
true, true.
Tough job.
Millions of people will not like you. Not just a couple in your city, but straight up millions will not like you.
Exactly. Well, thanks for that perspective, Nick. Let's flip back into our industry since you mentioned you enjoy it so much. The whole concept of our podcast is really diving deep into specific industry related topics that might be a little bit more on the peripheral of what we typically hear people talking about. So, Nick, in terms of uplifting the industry and restoring respect for contingent workforce, what strengths or talents do contingent workforce professionals consistently bring to the table that you feel deserve more recognition?
I mean, ultimately, it's expertise. This isn't a science, it's an art. I think there's a lot of people out there that bring great perspective to the role. Is there always a right way of doing SOW program or a contingent labor program? There's been a few programs that I've started up that I look back at and I say, this is what I would have done differently. And I do that with every implementation. You learn from each of them. And I think that's the expertise I bring to the table is that I definitely learn from my mistakes and I try not to repeat them. I look at the global perspective and roll it back because you don't want to make it industry specific in that nation or that country or in that sector because then it doesn't give you room to growth. And I think that's what a lot of the people in my role are starting to look more into is the longevity, the long path. I think a lot of companies are just one-sided sometimes, or companies that aren't used to this type of work or may have a Gen 1 or no Gen at all that are just looking at it from how we've done it in our business. So I think my role, and I think experts in my role, bring this type of expertise to start thinking about the holistic view of our industry and starting to tie that all back together from how it could be intertwined with, direct sourcing, VMS solutions, or even an MSP versus an internal program.
It's interesting. Like we joked in the beginning, nobody went to school for this stuff, and it's sort of like an expertise you gain through experience. Of course, there's some courses and certifications for this type of work, but all of it's purely learned from hands-on experience working with companies. Whether you're on the staffing side as a provider or whether you are running a contingent workforce program, none of this stuff can be taught, and so that expertise that we bring to our clients, whether it's our leadership or potential client, is so niche and unique. I'm glad that you bring that up because I think that gets overlooked a lot of times, particularly by those outside of that are doing this type of stuff day to day, perhaps in our leadership within enterprises that may not recognize sort of that expertise and the prowess it takes to think about work differently through the lens of non-employee talent.
I want to touch on the point you made, Nick, just around like a global rollout of the program. I mean, I've been involved in numerous global deployments of MSP, VMS solutions, or just contingent workforce programs globally, which is usually, hey, we've got a program here in North America. It works well. We've got some great things going. Let's pull that into some of the other markets where we have whatever the volume of contingent workforce is. You know, you obviously start somewhere where you've got higher numbers of contingent workers and then work your way down to the lower volume countries. But the challenges that always come out of that is it's not a cookie cutter thing. You can't just say, oh, what works really well here in the US
Yeah.
or even the broader North American market is going to work in the UK or France or Germany or go on down the line of numerous countries across Europe and Asia Pacific. So I've seen that approach fail as many times as you could imagine because some people are so rigid and thinking it has to work. It's the only way it's going to work. We just need to make the same thing work over here and not having the mindset as the owner of the contingent workforce program that the needs of a certain market may be quite different than what's happening in the US. So the perspective you shared there around learning from those different experiences and then trying to ensure that you're taking those learnings as you move, say, from one market to the next market, I think is a really good perspective because I know I've personally seen not everyone in your position thinks that way.
Like I said, I think it's an art. It's not a science. I think everyone brings their own texture, taste, understanding of the industry in their own way. And I think there's no right or wrong way of doing this job outside of just being negligence. But, for me, from where I sit, I look at it as a collaboration. You know, some companies look at another company in the same industry as a competitor. I look at it as opportunity. I look at it as a way of partnering. Um, sure, I could be competitive with better rates and better suppliers, but maybe 5 out of 10 times it's with the same MSP. They're right across the street doing the same thing, and we can build and work off of each other pretty well. So I don't look at it as competition. I look at it as opportunity to learn, grow, and even train. My expertise could help someone else. Someone else's expertise could help me. And I think that's a huge takeaway from a lot of these industry experiences that we're doing right now between conferences and podcasts and things like that. I think this is a great opportunity for leaders in the industry to learn and to even share.
There's that human element within our industry. Obviously, it's focused on deploying humans to go work in a contingent workforce fashion. And I think you bring up a great point there. There's a lot of competition inherently in the space and within any business, but we're very much interested in helping collaborate, helping think about things a little bit differently. I think we challenge each other in a very positive way, and that helps us all grow. And I think that's a really good piece you bring up and kind of segues into the next topic we want to get into, that bringing back the human element of the industry. Curious, in your experience, if you could share a time when maybe focusing on the human side of contingent staffing led to an unexpectedly positive outcome for your team or your company.
Our role is talent. It is quality of talent. It is understanding that sociological piece of, how can I connect with people? And it's not just with managers, it's also with your suppliers, it's with your workers, etc. I look at a time where, contingent labor at some companies, and again, I'm not speaking about Biogen, I'm speaking about, a Gen 1 company that, turned and burned, manufacturing, warehouse workers, where, you know, if the John time card in a minute late, they were tossed, and that's the type of mindset like blue collared roles are, I feel, in this country, is that, they're easy turn and burn. And so what I put in forth was a program that kind of gave back to second chancers, veterans, and moms into the workplace. And I built this in structure from a supplier standpoint where I gave managers an understanding that, hey, These are people. They're not something that we can take away from and just say a minute late. We have rules, policies. It was a training for these folks because don't forget, these workers that are managers of these warehouses are also blue collar. They come from the same town, they come from the same brand. And, I kind of brought them back down to that piece by kind of showing them this other demographic that we could bring in from a strategy standpoint, especially when you need to fill a high volume position. And, I look back at it and we had this one worker that stands out. She was a lovely woman who was a former warden at a prison. And she retired at retirement age. And she got into with one of the mothers and women in the workplace companies that we had on as a diverse supplier, and she took picker packer role in a warehouse. And then she was there for 6 months, and the manager was like, "I love this person's work ethic. I'm going to convert her," and she converted, and that showed like you could take skills that you never thought you had and apply it to a great role that you have in this warehouse, and then a year later she was promoted to a manager. So I look at the success of one bringing in a D&I program like that, or even just an opportunity of bringing in, a demographic of workers, kind of telling the managers, this is at will, of course, but not whim, and training them on how to properly manage this type of workforce. And then giving one person an opportunity to grow within that organization from start to finish. It brings complete kind of rationale to the idea of, we do this to be able to feel that connection of being able to accomplish one, an opportunity to give a person a job, one, to train those people to manage those workers, and two, that person to succeed outside of this whole program. Like you don't think about the quality of the people that are working in your program on what they're doing for their families, for their livelihood. They're paying for their kids' college, they're paying for their car payment, they're paying for their mortgage. That's that human aspect that we don't always think about. And there's a lot of trifectas here and a lot of stories. But the warden one is my favorite that I tell because she's in like this prison as a bad, can I swear, can I say ass person? A badass person.
We'll allow it. We'll
A
allow it.
badass person, and all of a sudden she's working in a warehouse, not needing the money, on a pension, and she just wants to contribute back to society as working, and ends up becoming a manager. That's an amazing story.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and you bring up some points that really resound with me. You talked about the DEI. I think that's a point that, while it's been rolled back in some companies, I think is very true in our industry. It seems like we're very focused on that enabling of the various folks in the DEI space, and that's one thing I personally love about this. That we're all about helping. It's all about people finding jobs, and you talk about the second chancers, whether they've just been in a tough spot in life, or in your spot, it was a former warden that just was looking for something else, and turns out she had an incredible work ethic. I think in general, our industry does a good job of bringing out the best in people, knowing that we are all just people, but we have some really good skills that we could bring forth that maybe aren't always known, and by finding the right job or opportunity can really bring a change to people's lives.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I thought similarly as you did, Mickey. I took out of that was here you have a great story of one individual, right? But I'm sure there are many, many more like that, and maybe some that you're completely unaware of just
Oh
because
yeah.
you created the program, right? And allowing second chancers and returning mothers that may have been out of work for some time, where their work history wasn't really strong or whatever on a typical resume. But like you said, that's something that really does showcase the human side of it, allowing people to come in, have a meaningful contribution, make a living that does help them with whatever their life situation is and whatever bills they have to pay. So I think it's great, Nick. Like you said, it's a great story of the one person, but I know there are many more behind that you may know of and many you may not know of just because of something that you were able to put together like that. So thanks for sharing that perspective. Switching gears a little bit here, Nick, what's one uncomfortable truth about the contingent workforce industries that you think more leaders need to confront?
I look at it in a few different ways because one, I don't want the business to think it's expendable because you hear about a lot of leaders losing their jobs today and they're outsourcing or insourcing or doing whatever, restructuring and throwing it under a person that's never been in the industry. I think you need to understand that even though our volumes are down across all industries, the volume's down. I think being in staffing, Matt, you can probably attest to that. These are rebuilding years for a lot of companies. And I think we need to recognize that even if volume's down, the job is not over or the job is not on a pause. This is the perfect time for us to invest in technology, invest in new policy, new strategic opportunity, building these programs for when things get a little bit better that you're prepared for and you're not jumping at a scenario like, oh crap, I haven't triaged this before. So I think is don't just sit back and kind of just wait for it. It's gonna come. It's probably gonna come in the next 6 months to a year. I think the volumes are gonna start picking up. The economy is gonna change a bit. Administrations are not. I think the industry is recovering from COVID, and it takes about 5 or 6 years, especially after what we just went through. It's just like a surgery. We had some trauma, and I think everyone, kind of dealt with that trauma one way or another. And a lot of companies are bouncing back, and a lot of companies are going to start reutilizing the staffing industry, reutilizing this role. And I think a lot of it's because they're not hiring FTEs. They're going the contingent route. And I'm pretty sure companies are going to get themselves in a situation where the governments are going to audit. DOL is going to get involved, not just the United States, but in many countries. And the cases of where workers are working cross border, we're going to be there to help them. So whoever is on the market, whoever is struggling with the idea that maybe they don't have a job tomorrow, or show your value, show that you can triage, show that you can roadmap and plan and build better exit strategies for yourself that show that you can also pick up more than just contingent labor, SOW. Talk about reorganizing your vendor supplier list, talk about rate cards, talk about, throw out RFP, throw out, do we need this multi-billion-dollar program? Can I go with something smaller? Or is what we have too small? Can I grow? Build roadmaps for yourself. Show the value, show what you can offer, and, build great partnerships with, the MSPs out there, the VMSs out there, the big EORs, the small mom and pops, and again, build those relationships so that you can prepare for next year or two.
There's definitely been a lot of change in the past, really, like you said, since the pandemic, right? The initial massive declines in the early days of the pandemic. And then obviously there was the great resignation movement that happened, and everybody was changing jobs because companies were fighting for more and more talent, hiring tons and tons of people. And now what we know is certainly in excess of what they probably needed because they were forecasting this continued increased demand for their products and services while everybody had expendable income staying at home. So then we've now seen really in the last 2 years, certainly since the middle of 2023, and now we're right in the middle of 2025. So that's kind of what I'm basing it off of. That number has declined, and as you said, there's been tons of layoffs across the board. Certainly, contingent volumes have stayed down. So we are in this down cycle. But the one thing, and I've been in this industry since 2003, so I came into staffing and recruitment right at the time of coming out of that dot-com bubble burst in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then post 9/11, where again, the markets were down. The markets were way down still. And what we saw was a rise really of contingent staffing started in 2004, 2005, 2006, and started seeing growth and growth and growth. And again, we hit the financial crisis and all the markets went down. But where we always see the rebound, or we saw the rebound coming out of that, was back in contingent staffing, because companies want to test the waters, right? Is this demand going to continue to be something that's here longer term? Are we going to see this rather than go FTE? It's a safer way to do the old try before you buy. So I agree with your perspective completely. This down cycle we've been in for 2 years, I don't believe can continue for a whole lot longer. I'm optimistic. Of course, I was optimistic coming into the beginning of this year that we might see some upward trends and some increased demands, but for various reasons, and we don't need to dive deep into all the geopolitical things that have happened, but I'm sure everyone listening and watching is well aware of what's been going on. So there's just been some factors that have put this sort of question mark on what's going to happen in terms of shaping the economic policies. And so companies are still playing the wait and see. But I do believe that if we get some clarity around some of the things that are happening geopolitically, that companies will start to say, okay, we have projects that we need to complete. We have new services or new products we want to launch. Certainly in your industry, right? I'm sure there's lots of stuff going on in R&D, but you can't necessarily go full steam ahead until you have that investment and some clarity on it. Is that money available to invest? So hopefully we'll start to see some of that as we move through this year and optimistically into the early part of next year. So I agree with you completely that the great perspective, while there's a down cycle, people do need to invest in themselves. People do need to figure out how to continue to add value, because the one piece that's always true in our business is when the cycles are down and the money's tight, cost savings is always on the table. And there's certainly levers to be pulled in a contingent program other than just not hiring, right? So there's areas that you highlighted in your response, which I completely agree with. And then obviously many of the things beyond that as well.
And I'll say this too. I think you hit something to the point. Is a lot of companies spent a lot of their capital into pivoting in COVID, and then what that dynamic looked like, and then it all stopped. Like it kind of woke up in 2022, and it was like, oh, COVID, what? It was like, a lot of these companies just spent all this capital to kind of pivot technology and pivot real estate, and they got, it all went down from there. And I think to rebound after blowing your savings, think about it that way, is you just went on vacation, you blew your savings, now you got to rebuild it. And then when's your next vacation? It's when I can afford it. And at that point, it could be 2 or 3 years. And in this case, I think a lot of companies are, if one company succeeds, then they're investing in other companies through either staffing, through technology, through different contracts. And then those companies are investing in those contracts and more staffing. And so there's a trifecta here. And I truly believe, regardless of the geopolitical climate, we are almost there. Like, you cannot continue in an economy. It's microeconomic 101 here. The economy needs to start spending cash again, and that is based off a product. Once product is ready, people will buy. People will then buy, and then people will sell, and people will continue to grow their organizations. And I've been saying 25, 26 since 23. I think 25 is a real big rebuilding year, and I think 26 is where you're going to see it. So hold me to it, 26.
You heard it here. Nick, I think this whole episode, you've
If I'm right, I should run for president, right? Then at that point.
There you go, taking it back to the topic on the
yeah, hold them accountable. Tying it together. Nick, I think you shared some really good expertise here. Starting in the beginning, our industry and the folks that are in it, we bring a very niche and unique expertise, and you put it best, it's an art, not a science, and we're learning along the way, and we're always trying to continue establishing credibility with our leadership and trying to drive change, because I think it was either you or Matt said this isn't cookie cutter, and it requires a dynamic way of thinking in the way that we approach this. I think you well articulated the human element of our industry and some of the positive stories that come along as well. And we're all just people trying to work a job and do the right thing for our families and for ourselves. And I think you had some pretty good actionable insights from our last question there, talking about trying to advance yourself in your program during this time and investing and giving some good ideas of things that you can do even during a downtime for some businesses and some companies. So I think that's a pretty powerful message that hopefully listeners can take away from this. And want to thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing all your great insights and everything with us. This has been great.
Thank you for having me, Mickey and Matt. Look forward to seeing the podcast and your other episodes, and I wish you guys the best on this.
Awesome. Cool, Nick. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in and listening, and we'll see you all again soon.